latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. Some interesting new data from our friend Michael Bahrain over at Liberal Patriot. It's not his data per se, it's the data of Echelon Insights, which is a Republican-leaning polling and data firm. And he pores over it and provides some analysis. According to Echelon's data, just 4 years ago, populists only made up self-identified populists, self-identified conservatives. It's a self-identification. Just 4 years ago, populists only made up 14% of the electorate, while conservatives were a plurality, 41%. Fast forward to present, and that gap has narrowed, with the share identifying as conservative falling to just 31%, down 10 points, while the populist ranks grew 8% to 22%. So it was 41 to 14, now it's 31-22, conservative to populist. And the latter groups rise, populists rise, coming directly at the expense of conservatives' numbers. And, in those tribes, if you will, represent basically the Trump governing coalition. Something else, too, on issues, since some of the establishment Republicans for so long decried the culture warriors within the ranks. We need to get away from social issues or moral issues and just focus on dollars and cents. That's where we win. Well, boy, I got some bad news for you if that's what you think, particularly now. On cultural issues, the right wins 5 of the 9 debates. On economic issues, the left wins 8 of the 9 debates. So let's just go through them briefly before we get some reaction from our friend Noah Rothman. So the cultural issues, the right wins 5 of 9 debates. Voters were asked that they agreed more with the more liberal position statement or the more conservative position statement on a variety of issues. Abortion should be legal in all or most circumstances. 59% say yes to 39%. Abortion should be illegal in all or most circumstances. Now, there's some nuance that's lost, but it gives you direction. It's important to control gun ownership. That's an even split. There are still significant obstacles that make it harder for women to get ahead than men. 57% agree with the liberal position. Gay and lesbian couples should be allowed to legally marry. That's still at 64%. Those are the 4 that they win, the left. The 5 that they lose, the government should deal with illegal immigration by increasing border security and enforcement. 55% say yes. Trans athletes should only be allowed to play on sports teams that match their birth gender. 65% say yes. People should be allowed to express unpopular opinions in public, even those that are deeply offensive to other people. Narrow majority, 51% say yes. Racism comes from individuals who hold racist views, not from our society and institutions. 58% say yes. We need to fully fund the budget for police departments. 62% say yes. So in those cultural issues of essentially law enforcement and free speech and judging people on an individual basis rather than categorizing them by their a non-behavioral characteristic of race, and essentially the implication is, affording spoils or imposing responsibilities accordingly, a la DEI, that's rejected. On the economic debates, the only one that conservatives win is on the statement, most people who want to get ahead can make it if they're willing to work hard. 52% say yes. As to compared to the liberal position, hard work and determination are no guarantees of success for most people, which is a view held by 46% of the population, as represented in this survey. The slight difference between those two numbers is sort of jarring. But then on the other economic issues, these statements have majority support. I would rather have a bigger government providing more services. One. The fact that some people in the U.S. are rich and others are poor is a problem that needs to be fixed. Government regulation of business is necessary to protect the public interest. The federal minimum wage must be increased to $20 an hour. We should raise taxes in order to ensure Social Security and Medicare's long-term future. It is the responsibility of the federal government to ensure everyone has health care coverage. Stricter environmental laws and regulations are worth the cost. We should raise taxes on people making more than $250,000 a year. All of those statements, on those economic matters, the left is winning. Now, this is not to say that these numbers are etched in stone, and they're not by huge majorities. It's a very divided country, so you can always persuade people by continuing to make arguments that are persuasive, that are rich with data and logic and anecdotes that illustrate the point. Just give up. But it is an interesting snapshot of where things are at as we watch these off-year statewide races in New Jersey and Virginia, and look ahead to the midterms in November of next year, of course. For more on this, pleased to be joined by Noah Rothman, senior writer at National Review, author of The Rise of the New Puritans, Fighting Back Against Progressives' War on Fun. Noah, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Any of that data I just sort of ran through quickly surprising to you? Is that sort of your handle on where you think the landscape was going into this conversation?
Well, yes, it is the landscape. It's been the landscape for several years, as the data suggests. I do have several thoughts. It does not surprise me insofar as the center of gravity within the Republican political coalition is populism now, as determined and defined by the president. There's a lot of people around him who try to apply their own reading of what MAGA populism is, only for the president to come around behind them and correct them. How many times have we experienced that? So it's a moving target, but it is generally the assumption on the part of Americans on the right that the ascendant political philosophy right now is one that prescribes activist government.
Yeah,
that's what people want. And conservatives are stung by this. They're insecure, and they feel defeated, and they're not speaking up as loudly as they had been previously. So I'm not surprised that you see a majority of the Republican political coalition leaning in that direction. I get frustrated with the revisionist history that I encounter when I argue with people who try to tell me that this is the ascendant philosophy. It is populism is the new fad, and it's not going away. Some of that data is illustrative of that. Talk about how culture warring is something that conservatives, the old style stodgy conservatives, rejected, which just doesn't fit with my experience. When was the time when the conservative legal movement got soft on Roe? When were conservative legal activists and cultural activists squishy on guns and gun control? At what point did they say affirmative action was something that we needed to live with, which is what we used to call DEI? I don't remember that.
No, but
you go over to the economic stuff. I'm sorry, just
yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
You go over to the economic stuff, and all I hear is how populists think that we should capitulate our ideas and our philosophy to this new ascendant idea. I mean, you had said poor people is a problem, and that should be solved. It's never going to be solved.
Right.
Just by virtue of the concept of relativity.
Right.
If we have economic inequality, and we will, if we have a productive economy, some people are going to be in the bottom quartile, and some people will be at the top. And that shifts and it changes. It's one of the miracles of the American economy. You look at the Forbes 500, and a lot of those people weren't there a generation ago because wealth moves, and it's created and it's destroyed. But the vast majority of those economic sentiments are, as you say, leftist economic sentiments. And my proposition is that we should fight for the values and ideas that we believe work. And what we euphemistically now call industrial policy, you might as well call it central planning. It's the same thing, and it still doesn't work. And conservatives should reject that. But the populists say, no, we should capitulate here on all this economic stuff that really matters, and we should fight tooth and nail on the cultural stuff, even though culture cannot be manufactured in a Washington think tank and imposed on the country from the top down. This is my frustration.
Yeah, I mean, I share a lot of that. What I would say about the cultural piece is no, the activist legal community fighting for individual Second Amendment rights or fighting for the rights of the unborn. I mean, that was always present, from Roe forward.
Right.
But I'm talking about sort of, maybe my experience in Illinois, being a member of the moribund and now effectively defunct Illinois Republican Party colors this, but I'm talking sort of like the country club set that was where a lot of the financing came from in some states like Illinois, that would say, we need to stop talking about, maybe even say something different about abortion, and we have Republican candidates running, for legislative offices that supported assault weapon bans and things like that, because they thought that's what they needed to do, and these are issues we need to take off the table. That was a phrase that was used all the time, and so, but it turns out that that they were wrong. I mean, they're so gun shy. How do we talk about these things in a way that doesn't disclose what we really think? Where even marriage redefinition, all the way to the early days of the ascendancy of boys in girls sports, where there were a lot of people who were afraid to speak out to get canceled. So I mean, that's who I'm talking about when I'm talking about an establishment set.
And you're right. I think we probably could go back to the height of this being around the immediate wake of the 2012 re-election of Barack Obama. That was when we had the Mitch Daniels talk about a social issues truce.
Yeah, right.
You had the GOP autopsy report saying, we need to back off immigration issues and get more friendly towards illegal immigrants. And I think you could say that was the height of that moment, where people said, these are our values, we should fight for them, but they're a political drag and we should moderate them for the foreseeable future. Absolutely. I concede that point.
Yeah, and
however,
it
was a political tactic, not a strategy. The tactic was designed to advance political objectives, get more Republicans in office so that they could, at a later date, with more political power, pursue these objectives. Nevertheless, I'd concede your point that this was an undue concession prompted by political stimuli, outside stimuli, that was overread and overdetermined. I believe that. I agree with that.
And I think
it was not. We're not saying to the activists, you need to give up your principles and your values, which is what the activists said. And then subsequently elected Donald Trump, who does not share those values, but has become a exemplary executor of those values, which he may or may not necessarily believe himself, which is not the sort of thing that anybody, I think, could have predicted.
Yeah.
If you predicted the future, good for you, but you don't get a lot of credit for predicting the future. That was a hunch, and you just happened to be correct about it. It's a happy occurrence that came to pass, largely speaking. But I also agree with you that at some point there's, and maybe it comes when Trump leaves the stage and J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio fight it out and so on and so forth. Although I think from their most recent philosophical offerings, J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio are not that far apart when it comes to activist government. I mean, Marco Rubio's common good capitalism speech at Georgetown a couple of years back. But at some point, and I wrote a piece about this in advance of last year's election about J.D. Vance. Somebody wanted to talk about it at the time. And nobody probably wants to talk about it now, but I'll talk about it anyway. Which is to say that, J.D. Vance's debate with Tim Walz back last year, even though he wiped the floor with him on points because he's the superior intellect, obviously, there was a lot in his responses that I found terribly problematic. And at some point, the Republican Party, again, maybe it's post-Trump, but not post-Trumpism, is going to have a discussion about this idea that government in all of these areas that it has intervened during the Trump era is always and necessarily a force for good if it is utilized right, as opposed to the idea there are things like you see playing out in Argentina under Milei, which as opposed to the idea that there are areas where government, even if the prospect of possibly doing some good exists, it is an area the government should not be involved in. The dangers are more replete than the opportunities for positivity, and we just need to rein in, like truly rein in. Stop talking about trying to get
Leviathan more revenue and start talking about materially shrinking it because there's all these things the government does that it has no business even attempting to do. And that's a conversation I don't think the party is ready for yet.
I just think the party has talked itself out of the notion that it's a winning argument. With ample evidence to suggest as much. Listen, I think you put your finger right on it. Republicans will never be able to outbid the party of government when it comes to appealing to voters who believe there should be bigger government. If that is the sentiment, you're attempting to appeal to that demographic, Democrats will always outbid you. This is the party that believes government should cosset you from cradle to grave, that should steal from you the options to have private health insurance. Republicans will never be able to distinguish themselves from Democrats in that way. Where they can distinguish themselves and have distinguished themselves is the degree to which they emphasize your economic liberty.
Yeah.
Your capacity to engineer your own circumstances, maximize your own happiness, exercise your own agency, secure for yourself your own lifestyle and livelihood, and protect and secure your own families. That is the sort of thing Democrats reject. They don't think you have that capacity. They think you need to have your hand held and guided through life. Otherwise, you're going to stick a fork in your eye. That is their philosophy, and it's not a philosophy Republicans should embrace. If they do, they'll find themselves behind the eight ball because Democrats will just come behind them and offer more and promise more.
Well,
Republicans should be the party of business.
Well, the good news is that right now the combination of Trump doing things that are popular and presenting evidence that is compelling when it comes to things like what ICE has done to remove people in this country who are public safety threats and other things, combined with the where the energy is with the other side, which is with the AOCs and the Jasmine Crockett's and the Mamdanis, seems political opportunity even in New Jersey and Virginia this year, and perhaps minimizing the damage of the historic damage that the incumbent party suffers in the midterms. Ted Van Dyke, who is more of a Kennedy Democrat, somebody who believed that a rising tide lifts all boats. You don't get that statement in the Democrat Party anywhere these days. Makes the argument in the Wall Street Journal: if history holds, Democrats may make some gains in the 2026 midterms, but certainly not based solely on Trump derangement syndrome. Not being Donald Trump is not enough. Democrat congressional leaders, governors, prominent private citizens need separately and together to develop national security, economic, and social welfare proposals that will appeal to a majority of citizens. How do we promise to keep them safe and prospering? What are our plans beside our plan to replace Trump? And the only cohort within their ranks offering plans are people like Mamdani, who want government-run grocery stores and $30 minimum wages and so forth. And maybe that will be enough. But, boy, it seems like there is a lot of skittishness even within their ranks, Hakeem Jeffries, case in point, to embracing those who are sort of having a populist moment on the left.
This is what I'm talking about. This is what we're talking about. The new ideas on the left are state-run grocery stores. These are not new ideas. Socialism is not a new idea. Socialism is just a rebranding of tribalism, ancient historical tribalism, chieftainism. What we're talking about, what Republicans used to talk about, is a very new idea, as evinced by the experience of Argentina, which is still experimenting with Hayek and Friedman. These ideas did not gain purchase until the end of the 20th century, the tail end of the 20th century, with Thatcherism and Reaganism. The idea that was the economic idea that was accepted wisdom was Keynesianism. It was the idea that the government should command the commanding heights of the economy, your steels, your trains, your coal industry, your transportation, all that stuff should be at least privately government owned, because otherwise it would be incredibly expensive. It wouldn't be accessible to the general public. And what did we get? We got sluggishness, we got low growth, we got moribund economies that were mired in debt and had absolutely no capacity for innovation. And all of a sudden, Hayek and Friedman come along. They have devotees in Thatcher and Reagan, and all of a sudden they start dismantling the mixed economies that prevailed throughout the 20th century in the 80s. We're only now, 30 years into this experiment, experiencing some of the best, most prosperity that human beings have ever experienced in the history of the species. And all of a sudden, we're getting rid of this idea because it's not flashy enough and returning to the stuff that is as stale as something that was left in a bomb shelter in the 50s. These are ancient ideas. Republicans have new ideas. They're just afraid to articulate them in a way that they think is sexy. They just don't have a lot of self-confidence. That's the problem. And so they've ceded all this ground to Democrats that they do not deserve, progressives that they do not deserve. I would like to. We hear so much about fight. I'd like to see some fight in some Republicans who actually believe in the efficiencies of free markets and free minds. That's the sort of thing that I like to see, and I don't see it very much. The one thing that you could say about Donald Trump that I think a lot of his supporters appreciate, and that I appreciate, is that he has a very high tolerance for political pain, much more than a lot of other Republicans. He's willing to take the slings and arrows for as long as it takes to see his objectives achieved, and even if that means taking a lot of heat in the interim. And that's the sort of thing that Republicans rightly resented in a lot of conventional Republicans in 2015 and earlier, that they didn't have tolerance for political pain. If the mainstream media got mad at them, they'd be very sensitive about it, and they'd change course. And Donald Trump doesn't do that.
Yeah,
Sometimes he embraces free market ideas. And sometimes he's willing to fight for them. And that's what I like to see. I'd like to see more of that in Republicans.
Yeah, 100%. And the other thing he recognizes is obvious opportunities that that other Republicans pass over because, as you said, they're afraid to put in the work to make the arguments and stuff for the slings and arrows. I mean, the backdrop of the plans that are being offered from the left are cities that are in death spirals like Chicago and New York and Baltimore. And so, this is Chicago or Baltimore, L.A., Karen Bass. These are examples. These are laboratories where their policies, their experiments are ongoing. How is it going? And so and here is the alternative way for big city America as well as suburban and exurban America. I mean, these faltering big cities is the perfect backdrop to make the case.
Absolutely. And one of the things that Democrats recognize as their biggest weakness, at least that's what we were hearing after the election in 2024, is that we are most represented by the experience of major American metros. We control them for the most part, and they are representative of our style of governance. And the representation that we're sending out to the country is not a good model. It's a failing model. And it's not just at the city level, it's at the state level. The blue state model in places like Massachusetts and Maryland and California, where you have New York, where you have rolling planned blackouts. I mean, the essential basic element of modern civilization is your capacity to produce on-demand power. And a lot of our states are not meeting that basic civilizational threshold. I mean, that's the sort of thing where you need to at least start. And I saw the statistic that's really hysterical, just briefly. California is struggling but is behind Texas and Florida when it comes to the development of green, environmentally friendly power generation technologies, despite the fact that California's raison d'etre is to create these projects, these green energy projects. Why? Because the economy sucks. Because they can't possibly figure out how to free and liberate their economic engines and get them to actually develop and build things. Texas and Florida do. Why? Because they have free market and free enterprise political philosophies that undergird the social compact. That's why they're beating California at their own game. I mean, it's an easy lesson to learn. The Californians, Democrats generally, need to tell their constituencies who are married to these socialist prescriptions where to get off so that they can actually deliver for their citizens.
Well, I mean, California is a Monty Python sketch. I mean, just as you're describing that, the story out of California, they're setting up a snitch culture. No, not for mask wearing. Now that's passé. A dedicated webpage for the public to report violations of the statewide ban on foodware made from polystyrene, which is styrofoam. So they want the public to help enforce the statewide styrofoam ban by ratting on their neighbors using styrofoam in foodware as foodware. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that, where they miss the forest for the twigs, so to speak, and you just see this play out over and over again.
Right. We should find a young Californian child who turns in his parents and becomes a hero of the hero of the republic. Young Pavlik Morozovs all over California.
Noah Rothman, senior writer at National Review, author of The Rise of the New Puritans, Fighting Back Against Progressives' War on Fun. Noah, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line. Coming up at 7:37, we'll continue our discussion in a more practical way about tariffs and trade and a tariff rebate. Stephen Moore joins us at 7:37. Now we check the headlines.